Hello, everyone out there. This is Christine West. I'm the host of the Emotional Dilemma podcast. And I am super, super jazzed today because I have this guest, Jason Pierce, who, when I met him, we met on LinkedIn. And we jumped on a Zoom, and our conversation was so intriguing because Jason's discipline is so different than mine in the psychological field, but he's so involved in things that are forensic, which is, there's a lot of forensic psychology, but forensic accounting. And it's so intriguing to me that I wanted to bring him on, and I'm so happy that he agreed to be here. So welcome, Jason, to the show. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Definitely. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So for our viewers and listeners, can you share with folks a little bit who you are today?
Yeah. So I'm a senior vice president at JS Health. So the way I describe that, it's a global consulting company. So part of that is it doing some financial forensics, as you're saying, forensic accounting, but also some business valuation. So that involves a couple of disciplines in order to be successful in that area. So
yeah. So how did you get into this? How did you choose this field?
Yeah, if after I graduated college, if you would ask me like forensic accounting, I'm like, well, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, what is
it? But as I lived in Alaska out of college and before, going to these remote communities and where their books are less than stellar, trying to unscramble what happened and all that stuff. I didn't realize it at the time, but that was forensic accounting, and just rooting around in what we call the general ledger, understanding the flow of money and the funds and all that stuff. And so kind of fast forward, that foundation is very helpful now when you're trying to evaluate a business and say, what's this thing worth? Or if you've got a restaurant that's been around for 20 years and doesn't make any money, it's like, how is that possible? So you got to know where the skeletons are, so to speak.
Sure. So how is that different, forensic accounting? How is that different than general bookkeeping?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the reasons that I am drawn to this space, the first 10 years of my career was auditing, as I was saying, and call it tax preparation and stuff. But it is almost like looking backwards, like how did we do last year? Or how did we do last week? Somebody's got to go and mop up that trail and see, make sure everything's categorized correctly and all that. And that's more of the traditional accounting. Like the business valuation, it's looking forward, like where are we going and what's that worth? And so just the focus really is what, it's kind of fascinating, and really underneath that, it's at what point does an idea become worth something? And I think the answer is when enough people start to believe it. So for me, that's just kind of a fascinating concept.
So okay, you said something very interesting to me. That's cool. How does an idea become valuable when enough people believe it? Because now we're crossing disciplines. Because in the psychological field, it's all about, what do we believe? And what we carry as belief, ends up being manifesting to be true. So how does that belief show value from a forensic accounting perspective?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is why we're doing this, right?
Exactly.
It's gonna get good. So in my side, it's what is business valuation at its core? It's a prophecy into the future. So let's say you've got a business that's been around for 10 years. Great. Doesn't mean that anything that happened last year is what's relevant in the future, especially if you, at the time we're recording, you had money in FTX or Silicon Valley Bank or, some of these implosions along the way. So a business value is what it's going to do into the future. And so if you've got this cool idea, I have a pen in my hand. So if you're like, hey, I've got a new idea for this pen company, but I don't have enough money to go get the prototype or buy the warehouse or hire some employees and things like that. So you have to convince the bankers, the employees, the customers, you just have to be good at not only what you're core mission is, but also like be able to communicate um, what your idea is, and if that means like getting some money and getting some customers, then that's kind of where it's at.
Well, see, what was so fascinating to me, what you're speaking of, I just listening, because that's what I do, and listening to the overlays of the psychology in this.
Mm-hmm.
Because you said you need to communicate it to go get some money. And so many folks miss that in that ask, because there's a way to ask to get a yes, and there's a way to ask to get a no.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, just like drop your posture and look away, or all. I mean, all that stuff that you know. But on my side, it's if thinking about for the ask, right? So I'm just thinking of if we have a business, right, where they're trying to, I don't know, get started, and you have this great idea. Well, great, like, okay, it's I helped out with the entrepreneur class at APU. No, I guess this was at UAA.
Okay.
And I forget the gentleman's name that started New Sagaya. He came in one day and he's like, don't you know it's fire, ready, aim? It's like, just don't go do something, and then kind of adjust course as you get going. But a lot of that ability to communicate runs through not only the founders, but in my line of work too. A lot of accountants just think, well, if I do the spreadsheets and here's pages full of numbers, don't you see it? No, most people don't see it. Most people don't have an accounting degree, and it is just pages full of numbers. So you have to be able to distill it in a way that other people can understand. And
right. Yeah, we're speaking the same discipline. I mean, from a different perspective, different angle, because it's in what you spoke of in Alaska business. You use New Sagaya. So in that example, so for, let's just, since they're known for, with seafood. So now most people would know what a fish is, but at the same time, as you're well aware, that there's different types of salmon.
Oh yeah, I mean, isn't, like, I think Yupik has 26 words for snow, so like, yeah.
Yeah. So you being in the villages, let's go back to that, because that's really interesting to me. Were you actually the person going out to these small, like, rural communities?
Oh yeah, I've been all over the state, which is great when you're in your 20s, but probably not so good when I have a family. But yeah, I literally been all over the state. I've been to the Privilofs. We used to do the audit for the Privilofs, so I've probably been out there 20 times, So.
So from that perspective, I'm making the strong assumption, but I would like to assume that we're speaking evaluation. So you would also be the person who would be hired to, if somebody wants to sell their business.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So like the audit days where you're just kind of doing the diligence, I had no clue about business valuation. A lot of that was the tribes anyway. So, but now it's like, yeah, you still have the diligence. You still gotta like understand what makes this business tick, but it's an eye on like, well, just because you had a good year last year, or even like COVID, you had a bad year the last 2 years, but the future looks great. You finally got the supply chain issue worked out, or whatever, and that's where the expected returns is matched against the risk. And if you think about, like, on one end of the spectrum, we've got government bonds. On the other end of the spectrum, we're like, let's go to Vegas and let it ride. In the middle, you have that scale of risk, and that becomes like the appraiser's job, is to figure out where this particular business is on that scale, balance that against the expected like cash flows or profits, and go from there.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to ask you, with that said, because I'm certain that you probably run into some very interesting like discoveries. Because in my world, if I'm evaluating the human side, you discover interesting behaviors that don't need to be there. And so what are some of the things that you have discovered that are interesting that don't need to be there?
Oh yeah, I mean, this next to the private investigators and the criminal tax attorneys, I think we have the best stories.
Yeah.
Certainly, like the CPA firms and whatnot. So yeah, you get cast of characters, and I certainly think that I see my more than my share of fraudulent tax returns.
Yeah.
But that then becomes you know, you start with the reported results, start with the tax returns, start with the audits, and then you go to the site visit and you're looking around and see like, wow, is this really busy? You
Yeah.
know, is the person that I'm talking to like doing this? Well, maybe if I'm on the other side, they're
Right.
probably going to be doing that. But it also could be because they're cold. So
Right.
it's something that I have to kind of recognize of like, okay, whatever they're going to say, it's a trust but verify sort of game, for lack of a better term. So it's like, yeah, you can tell me whatever you want and I'll listen and I'll write it down, but just know that I'm going to go check it out.
Yeah. Cool. So how does that get you into things such as the law? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's I describe what I do, and again, so I'm oftentimes the expert witness, or like the due diligence person in a transaction of like, yeah, this looks good, what they're offering you, or no, don't take that deal,
Right.
whatever. But in the context of where, like, let's say I might think the business is worth $1 million, the other person might think it's worth 0 or 10 million, and if there is let's say some conflict around that, that's where the litigation kind of comes in. So I may do my diligence, have a supportable or defendable position, and still be wrong. Like maybe I made an error, like that just happens. So fine. But it's also like I describe it as that I'm like the World War One stretcher bearer, the
Okay.
Red Cross people just trying to run out on the battlefield while
Yeah.
the shots are firing, and do what I got to do and get off without getting shot. That's litigation from an expert perspective.
Interesting. So how, okay, let's back up because you're doing some incredible, interesting things out there. So for our viewers and with this podcast, because obviously experts need to grow. We're not just born into being an expert. Are there things for you that in your beginnings that, I mean, is there any war stories that you're willing to share, that as far as how did you get from where you started, running around Alaska, to here you are in the lower 48, and you're an expert witness, you're doing all these interesting things.
Yeah.
How'd you get from that point to this point?
Yeah, well, you can see some of the gray. So like it's taken a while for sure, but I think a big part of that was I grew up with low self-esteem for sure. Not afraid to like say about that, but at some point, I stopped, I guess, believing that what other people thought was more important than what I thought.
Okay.
And part of that kind of came around. There was a confluence of factors involving a family business and me getting into martial arts and becoming a father. All that kind of like happened at the same time. And so I just kind of took that bottom, if you will, and say, all right, it's time to like grow up, really. And it just so happens that there is, I'd say, some overlap in the martial arts and the litigation forum. You're just fighting with words instead of like
Right.
your bodies. So
Well, that's interesting because a couple things that you said that, well, actually three things that I want to comment on is you talked about, the self-esteem, which then goes back to the belief, because what we believe, our self-esteem really helps us to determine how the world treats us.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, so I'm one of those like self-improvement kind of junkies, like
Yeah.
the runs and the impact theories and Zig Ziglars and
Yeah.
a lot of those folks. It's that you're an average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. Well, they might not be right here next to me, but I can watch them on YouTube or listen to their podcast or whatever. So there's definitely a lot of that wisdom that other people have paved the path. And if I could adapt some of that stuff, then great. I mean, a lot of it too is like, taking the difference between like rah, I'm really motivated to go clean my house today, but then the next time it's dirty and I'm hungover or whatever, it's like, I don't want to do this. So action is a big part of that, and holding yourself accountable and for me, I have a like a habit tracker kind of thing. It's like, so there's some things that I want to make sure that I can just check the box every day, and something as simple as like, all right, did you do push-ups today or whatever? Did you read like your craft? Did you read a business valuation book or a couple pages? And if I can, say yes, then when I look at myself in the mirror, like that's the person I'm trying to like, feel good about. Like how do you feel about yourself when you're by yourself? Like that's what I'm after.
So what, in summary of what I'm hearing, is it's about a sum of your decisions, who you're surrounding yourself with, your habits, the action. So it's really about being aware of your decisions so that you're moving in the direction you want to be moving in.
Oh, for sure. And what like I tell the folks I work with, it's like, we might not be where we want to be today, but all we got to do is look at some of those old reports and just be thankful that the statute of limitations is run on those. Because once you start looking at your old reports, you're like, oh, did I really think that? Or whoops, I totally missed this one. So, and looking at it from, instead of failure being, like the dagger to your heart of, I see it more of like, hey, this is real-time data from a maybe a biased source, but certainly a third party. So what can we learn from that we could implement, and like, okay, let's course correct, and maybe we'll go a little more left next time, or whatever we need to do to figure it out next time.
So how do you keep yourself motivated? And I mean, because everybody has, things that they face from, you brought up, self-esteem and, being, real, that, I mean, every human being, has, days where they talk crappy to themselves.
Oh, for sure. And I've heard that term as like ants, is like automatic negative thoughts. So yeah, you can't control that stuff, but you could control how much you listen to it. So if you got, like, I'm one of those like monkey mind kind of people, and so I just have to like, just kind of buckle down and say, okay, well, now is not the time to beat myself up. Now is the time to meet this 5 o'clock deadline, and let's go. And so that helps, because litigation, like, I usually have a plan for the day, but usually about 10:30, I'm doing something totally different, just because there's a lot of change and a lot of like, oops, didn't I tell you there was a trial next week? That just happened recently. Friday afternoon, somebody reached out and was like, oh, can you come testify on Monday? I'm like, who are you? Like, come on. That's so unfair. Yeah.
So back to the martial arts in the courtroom, because I like that. I like that example. And because at least when I think of a courtroom, depends on what side of the fence you're on. If you're the plaintiff side or the defensive side, there's a different strategy. So, not that I've ever studied martial arts, but just looking at it, to me, it's a mental and emotional discipline.
Oh, for sure. And know that, I'm not going to sleep good the night before, and I don't have all the information that I wanted, or the time, or the money, or all that stuff, and just saying, this is what I got today. Good or bad, I'm tired, I worked out, whatever, I'm motivated, let's go. But this is all what I've got to work with today, so this is what we're doing. And just kind of focus in on that, instead of like, oh, did you see that spot on my shirt? Like, oh, everybody's noticing that zit I've got, or whatever. So.
Now, in the courtroom, I'm curious, as an expert witness, it doesn't matter which side you're on, have you ever had, the opposing side say things such as, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Oh, yeah.
He's biased. He's getting paid. He's getting paid to say that.
Yes, I'm being paid for my time, counsel, not for my testimony. Yes, that's a common sort of question. Yeah, so yeah, it's theater to a large degree. Everybody knows their role that they're going to play. Like I'm the expert, I have a role. Like the defendant, the plaintiff, everybody's got their role. You just don't know what they're going to say.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to be. I mean, you kind of do more or less, especially if you get a chance to look at the complaint, or maybe they take your deposition. Like, they're asking a lot of questions about this. Maybe I should be prepared to answer that in front of the judge. But yeah, you can't be distracted with the noise. But also in this business, when people start to attack you personally, then it's like, oh, you don't have a case, do you? Because if you're going to go after me, if you had a case, you'd be going after the real stuff. So
well, right. It's because it's interesting when I have helped those, prep for, to be in a courtroom. What's always interesting to me about human nature is needing to teach people how to think. Because and from my perspective, and listen to what you're being asked, not what you think they're asking you, but answer the question based on what they asked you and answer directly only that. Do not create loopholes in the conversation.
For sure. And even if you've been asked that same question 5 times in the last 3 minutes, you still look at it from this is a question in isolation that there may never be another one like it, but I'm just going to answer what they're asking. Sometimes I will use the opportunity to, kind of work in some of the stuff that I want to say. Yes, but, and blah, 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 blah. And a lot of times the attorneys will say, strike everything after the word yes. And a lot of times the court will, but sometimes you get it in. And so that's maybe more advanced class kind of stuff. But yeah.
Well, right. Because it's because one thing that human nature has certain bad habits of is going overboard in what they're going to offer. So for example, a simple question could be such as, do you like the color blue? Now that to me, it could just be answered yes or no. But somebody would end up saying, well, it depends on what shade of blue we're talking about. And okay. And I like midnight blue, but I don't like baby blue, which then all of a sudden opens a window of opportunity to.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. If you give somebody, opposing counsel just a little tidbit or an adjective, they'll be like, oh, let me ask you about that adjective because you just volunteered stuff, and now there could be a whole nother line of questioning on that. Or if it's perceived as you're being defensive, then it's like, not that you have something to hide, but that's a soft spot. They're always looking for soft spots. And if you can, like, if you have an answer that's halfway intelligent, even if it's not the best, they're probably just going to move on to something else.
Right.
But if you're like, well, let me tell you about this, and blah blah blah, then they're probably you might be there for 30 minutes just answering that same topic questions.
Yeah, or to me the famous yeah but.
Yeah, you can't handle the truth. Yeah, like being combative is another problem.
Yeah, because I know a lot of times people make mistakes because maybe the question is asked 3 different ways, but it doesn't mean that the answer needs to be answered 3 different ways.
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. It's and that's where it's like if I'm an advocate for my opinion rather than the client, and I kind of keep it in the confines of my lane.
Yep.
A crafty attorney will try to pull me out and say, oh, I know we're here to talk about business valuation, but let me get you talking about taxes. I'm like, well, I'm not here to talk about taxes. I'm here to talk about business valuation. Or, I mean, that's a bad example because that could be a subject. But you get my point. Is like,
well, I get your points because part of what you're saying, from my point of view, it's being aware and being aware about paying attention to what is being asked, and in being able to have that confidence with one's self-esteem to be, okay, you asked me about a business evaluation. And I'm going to answer you based on your question on business evaluation. And boom. Now, if the attorney comes back and says something such as, okay, but I really wanted to know about, did they pay their taxes? Okay, well, yes. Okay, yes, they did. Instead of saying something like, oh, well, let's go through their, their books and let's see if they did. Says coming prepared. And I know the court would not be that simple as what I just said, but I'm just giving an example.
Yeah. And this is where it's, in some ways, experience kind of dulls you to some of that stuff. It's like, oh, well, I've testified a lot. I don't need to look at everything. Versus when I was coming up, like that very first case, I knew everything. They could have asked me anything on that, and I would have answered it. But then I struggled with I had tunnel vision on one of those where it's like, wow, you're getting really small, and I'm about to lose. I'm just gonna pass out here.
Yeah. Yeah. So part of, from my view, and I'm biased and I'm just going to throw this out there, that I believe that people who have higher emotional intelligence are going to do better in a courtroom, or they're going to do better in leadership or in business.
And that I was going to say that earlier, is there was a study or a white paper the AICPA put out where they surveyed academics, attorneys, and accountants to see what is the best qualities or what's the attributes of a forensic accountant. And so the accountant said, well, you got to be a number cruncher. You got to be able to like analyze and understand it. Cool. Well, guess what the attorney said? You got to be able to communicate it. And so yeah, you could have the right answer, but if you can't get it out in such a way that other people understand, you're going to lose the case.
You will, because that's something that, it's interesting in, let's just speak since 2020. I know HBR in 2021 evaluated that emotional intelligence was the top 5, skills to have. And then in 2022, it came out that, looking at no matter what the discipline is, your discipline number cruncher. So let's say if somebody's an MBA, and there's smart people being an MBA, but if you cannot communicate with people to get them to follow where you're going, or be able to read those people, then what good are you?
Oh yeah, I'm counseling a friend right now. What's that called? Like the Peter Principle, where his boss was promoted beyond their level of competence. And so the default in our industry is like, well, I don't want to talk to people. I just want to do my job and crunch numbers. But if you're the boss and you're responsible to get some work and make sure everybody else is like doing it or happy or, all that, the administrative type stuff. Well, if you're just locked in your office, you're going to have people quit, or you're going to go bankrupt because there's nothing in the pipeline to keep it going.
Well, right, because people, no matter what the discipline, and I find that what you're doing incredibly valuable and incredibly important. But it was more interesting to me when we met because you were able to communicate it in a way that held my attention. And because once upon a time I would find, the number crunching like incredibly boring. But admit to it but because if it's presented in a way that holds my attention, where I get it, and to me that's the whole thing. And even when you're speaking of a courtroom, because a jury is not a forensic accountant.
Yep. Yeah. And this is why I think people should teach. The very first class that I taught was at UAA. It was Accounting 201. I was like, I got this. That's what I do. I'm an accountant. Until the very first day, I was like, went through the syllabus. Like, I got nothing here. So this is hard work, and there was one day where one of my students says, you mumble your words and you trail off at the end of your sentences. And everybody got quiet. And that could have been like devastating, like, how dare you or whatever. But I'm like, okay, well, what I said is like, guess what? It's only going to get better from here. because thank you for the feedback. Let's try to course correct. But yeah, when you are in front of people, call it embarrassing yourself, you tend to remember the stuff that embarrassed you, where you don't want to do that again. And if you're putting people to sleep, oh, maybe I'll walk over here, or whatever. I'll talk a little louder, like kind of like do that stuff. So you just don't know that unless you have some practice.
Yeah, I think the era of speaking in jargon is over.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people still do it, but yet it's not sexy.
Yeah. I mean, especially like, I'm sure we could just make a list of like those kind of jargony words, but yeah, if like, just because it sounds good, and people that work for public companies just kind of like rattle that stuff off, or if they're in commission based or whatever, and that's their deal, like, cool, I've condensed what I do into a 30-second little soundbite, and it's got some jargon in there, but nobody understands, like, what is that?
Well, exactly, because from a perspective in my discipline, what we're speaking about, whether it's a courtroom or let's say an audit, because that's very common, and where my memory goes back to, and I'm sure this is a familiar era to you, when we switched over from 1999 to 2000 and the rumors about what was going to happen.
Yep.
And I can remember consulting at the time and sitting in front of folks like you, because doing some project management, and because that was what was available for me to earn a living off of, and sitting in front of people like you and being like, oh my God, I gotta explain all this. And it was more of the communication to simplify the books of the project books.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody thought back then we're going to die and everything was going to explode.
Right. If they only knew now, right? Like, look where we've come.
Yeah. That all technology was going to shut off and we're going to die.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I bring that up because back then it wasn't as prevalent about let's speak where people can communicate. But today, and especially since 2020, I'm finding, at least in arenas that I play in, people find it to be a more value of if you can communicate whatever discipline it is of your expertise.
Oh, for sure. And I've heard the term like multi-channel specialist. That's not mine, but I like that, and it's from that book Range. I want to say Daniel. I'm forgetting his last name right now, but there's a good book on range, and it's basically, the concept is the people that specialize too early don't have the breadth to encounter like uncertainty, but the people that did different disciplines or different jobs at different levels or whatever, they could bring more kind of Batman utility belt tools to any situation, and kind of like the MacGyver, like, yeah, I'll figure it out. Instead of, if I just did this one thing as a career path, then you don't know how to troubleshoot. I think that's an important skill. So.
Well, it is, because at least what I see in the world, the most of the time, why people get so aggravated with other humans is because of feeling misunderstood, or their time gets wasted in some type of nebulous, communication that doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So to me, it would be, for example, if somebody hired you to, hey, I want you to evaluate my business because I want to decide if I'm ready to sell it, what's the value is. And then all of a sudden what you do is say, no, well, wait a minute, I'm going to look into your taxes, and which is important for sale. But if you said, no, I'm just going to look at your taxes, and okay. Did you realize you have these errors here? And you never explain to him why that's important.
Yeah, what are all these adjustments? But yeah, I mean, and to your point about like knowing the audience or having that intelligence, especially in my mind or my field where there's a lot of conflict, oftentimes there's some of that necessary chit chat at the beginning, because I got to let them unload. Their emotional state is way up here, and they're fired up about something, but give them about 15 minutes to kind of let some of that steam out okay, now let's have that conversation that I'm here to really do.
Well, it's also a question of how I look at it is, as an expert, I understand that there is, in some cases, it's fun to, okay, let's trigger somebody so they get aggravated, especially if they're the opposition. But and I say that temporarily. I'm just closing. Okay, every human likes to do that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's having an awareness to, what is my objective here? Is it to aggravate, or am I looking to take this to get somebody to agree with me or do something?
Oh yeah, for sure. And yeah, there are times like that is the goal. It's like, hey, I'm gonna like be kind of baseline and then wait for that one question and just see what they do, because there is some tax fraud or whatever. But a lot of times too, like I do joint engagements where it is that tightrope of balancing competing differences, and I just tell people kind of like up at the front, like, yeah, I'm joking and I'm smiling, but it's true. Is that by the end of this, if you guys aren't both mad at me, then I'm probably not where I need to be. So,
Well, right, because one of the things, and goes back to, your thing about martial arts, is that the person who has the most emotional control and doesn't take things so personal is going to get further, because from my view of things, if I'm having a conversation with somebody and they're defensive and I'm completely calm, they're going to make godzillion mistakes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, just think if you're juggling, you might be juggling like unnecessary balls. So if you've got so much jumble going on in your brain, it's occupying resources.
Yeah.
But if you can be level and like have that zanchin, like be ready for anything but calm like the water, like then you're ready to go.
Right.
You're not like burning up inside and like
you're not reactive to waiting for, just because somebody's throwing a bunch of stuff at you.
Yes.
And even if their judgment is nasty, if and it goes back to self-esteem, belief, if you accept that belief, then you're going to lose it. But if it's something that you have your inner validation of saying, great, that's just their wonderful opinion, and this is just distractive right now.
Oh yeah, I would butcher the story, but there's one about the Buddha where somebody is like spewing hate or vitriol on him, and the question was like, well, if someone offers you a gift and you don't accept it, who owns that gift? And it's the person who was spewing the venom, and so he's like, well, I refuse your gift of this hate. So it's like I'm just gonna go about my business, and I love that.
Yeah, there was something that I posted not too long ago. It was a little Indian tale where it was about two wolves, and the elder Indian was telling his his grandson, "Hey, there's an angry wolf that has hate and spews out all this negativity, and then there's this other wolf that spews out love and joy and encouragement, and they're constantly at battle." And so the little boy says, well, which one wins?
The one you feed.
The one you feed. Yeah, the one you feed. The one you feed. So it's something that, whether it's martial arts, the courtroom, forensic accounting, psychology, no matter what the business is, to me, when you can recognize, you can't dismiss your emotions. They're not something you can offload.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I think it's a good point. It's so right now, like we're having a great conversation. I'm having lots of fun, but after this, I'm an introvert, so I won't want to talk to anybody tonight, not even my family. So yeah, and knowing that about yourself of like, okay, if I got to perform, do something at a certain time, let's maximize the likelihood that I'm gonna be at peak on that time. Maybe you need to do something in the morning because you're a morning person or whatever. But then no, like for me, like I gotta recharge the battery. Otherwise, I'm just gonna go I'm just gonna freak out or something. So I just
No, that's interesting you brought that up because I'm an extroverted introvert, which a lot of people, when they meet me, they're like, oh yeah, you're really extroverted. Well, at a lot of levels I am because I'm very social, but my recharge state is very introverted.
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, we share that.
Yeah, it's something where, for me, going out into the woods or just being at peace, where well, you get it, you've lived in Alaska. Oh, joy, there's no people out here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's not scary. Where for some people that would be very scary. Why isn't there any people in the woods?
Yeah, I need my phone. Like I gotta have like constant stimulation. Like yeah, that's a problem too.
Yeah, it's something that I find in any discipline what you're doing is so incredibly valuable because often I can imagine just using the word forensic can be a scary word for people.
For sure, and people, and they don't understand, which is fine. They don't need to understand, and I just say, look, I'm gonna use the term, even though I know you're not gonna get it, because if I say it like 3 or 4 or 5 times, then eventually you're gonna be like, okay, keep saying this. What is this? I'm gonna figure it out. And if it's important, then yeah, and if it matters at the trial, then the more everybody understands what's going on, then great. But yeah, I guess it gets back to like communication and you know I forget where I was going exactly, but
Okay. So in your work, I'm curious to know, and I don't want to know who it is because that's confidential, is who can you describe was the most interesting person that was accused of something, and because of your testimony that you set them free?
yeah. I mean, I did just have a criminal case where it was dragging for 6 years, and basically we're like, hey, the state, you don't have a case here, so just let this thing go, and they did. But that's the one that I really enjoy, which is with specific to a real estate developer, where there was, say, like 20 entities, and it was just a shell game of due to, due froms, and management fees, and the complexity. Just because if you were the IRS agent, you just saw one return, doesn't look so bad, but knowing you need to put 20 of them together and see how it all connects, and then it would just be so obvious. For example, like when a property would sell, it would go into one company as a loan. And without getting into the accounting, the loan and the revenue have the same characteristics. So that was just a way to kind of wash this out. And then over time, all the personal expenses would just go against that shareholder loan. And it was like, it was done. I was like, man, that's a pretty good scheme. Those of you who are out there, just know that we're on to you. But yeah, the CPA was helping put that together. I don't think most people wouldn't figure that out. So.
Well, that's interesting. So what I'm hearing is that you're the guy who's going to shine a spotlight on things that most people don't even know where to look.
Oh yeah. I mean, we have a fraud case right now. If I start talking about it, I'll probably like spill the beans. So, but
yeah,
yeah.
I don't want you to say anything
Right.
that should not be public at this point.
Yeah, but it is just like figuring out the puzzle. And so one of the definitions for forensic accounting that I like is the art and science of investigating people and money. So it's not just the money. Once you figure out the people, then it's like, oh, people fall into a pattern. On Thursdays, they go to the ATM and do whatever, or they write that check, or they make that journal entry. So once you can figure out that pattern, then the rest kind of falls into place at that point.
Well, that's what's so intriguing to me because, I follow patterns also. And as far as the people patterns about, what some people don't realize about, subconsciously we're living out so many patterns that people think, no, nobody can see that. And what you just said is simple as, okay, on every Thursday, I go to the ATM.
Mm-hmm.
And then every Friday, this is what I do. Oh, nobody noticed.
Right.
Well,
Right.
there's a trail of it. And but it's similar in my world about if I look at patterns of that people have been carrying around with them for say 50 years
Yeah.
about, or if they have trauma, some type of trauma. Every person has some degree of trauma.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So it's very similar of, if somebody was like, because I've worked with people, for example, that they have unresolved stuff, say with their dad. And then they keep, showing up, getting new jobs, and that their boss behaves just like their dad.
Oh yeah.
And then they're manifesting it because psychologically they're trying to heal it, but then they don't realize that they're acting out a pattern. So I can imagine what you're speaking of is somewhere along the line, they learn that's what you're supposed to do to hide something.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, like I'm a military brat, so
Yeah.
like every 3 years, it's like, okay, reshuffle, like, and so you just have to be used to dealing with change. Where I think a lot of people get to a certain point in life, and then that's it. That's going to be their baseline, and they're always going to brush their teeth with their right hand and never like kind of mix it up, or I don't know. You get the point. It's like go a different way home from work, like that kind of stuff. So.
Well, it's also, it's interesting today with advancement in technology that I would believe that it's very difficult to hide.
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, for sure. Even the crypto stuff, we could totally get going about that. But
Yeah.
that's I've heard referred to as deferred prosecution. So people think, oh, it's just the criminals on there, and that's true. I mean, there's some on there, but there's a pathway for every transaction that's ever happened. Even the folks like that deal with the cash, like I was talking about the restaurants, or think of the landscapers or the hair salons or whatever, where you're dealing with cash. Yeah, that's trickier. And even on the landscapers, like, well, do you have the software where we can see where these trucks are going? Okay, we could reverse engineer that. Or the bingo places in Alaska, you can weigh the tubs, before the pull tabs before and after, and see how much you sold, that kind of stuff. So there's usually ways around that. But yeah, even today, I mean, I think they stopped doing that survey, but up until, I mean, let's say a few years ago, check fraud was still like the most common source of embezzlement. And I'm like, why? It doesn't even make sense, because for somebody like me, that's like, accounting 201. Like, okay, somebody like me anybody should be able to figure that out if you have half a sense as an accountant.
Well, I attended some time ago some presentation of somebody that came out and showed us, different pen ink and different things about check fraud. That was fascinating to me.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Like I didn't even think about it.
And that is so true. Talking about patterns. So let's say QuickBooks has kind of an ovally shaped for some of the boxes. And then, if you're looking at invoices and lots of ovals and whatever, in auditing, you're looking for consistency. Oh, the date match, does the account match, does the payee match, etc. But in forensic accounting, you're looking for differences. So it's like, okay, same. Wait, that's a square.
Yeah.
That's been doctored, or that the one I'm working on right now, they went into Adobe and just altered the ending balance. A lot of times people they're not really good at that. That'll be crooked or a different font, something like that. But sometimes it's pretty good, and it's hard to tell unless you like do what I do, where you let's grab all the data off of the statements, dump it into an Excel, and then basically recreate the statement. You can't really do that by hand. In the old days, you just get those 10 keys and add it up. Well, you might get to line 300 and then make a mess up and like, oh, I got to start all over. But here, it's just like we're going to scrape the data, drop it into Excel, and then it's just a matter of like sorting it.
Well, it's interesting from what I was listening to you about, giving your examples about, when people add it, saying using Adobe and do something that, that they're, is slightly off to the eye. What a lot of things that people don't realize also, and I'm speaking from, a psychological point of view, that also and this is probably a forensic, psychological thing, but when I listen to people, when I listen to let them say, point A, and then explain like point B and then point C. Well, if it doesn't make any sense for how you got from A to B to C, and where people are so used to telling themselves that, okay, well, that's fine, that's the story.
Mhm.
And then mapping it out for someone to say, okay, you haven't, this makes no sense.
Oh, for sure.
I need you to tell me what B really is.
Yeah, and that's there. This is a logic business, and that's where I think the accountants, the strength of the critical thinking and the
Yeah.
ability to analyze, like that's kind of in our wheelhouse. But yeah, if you have somebody that just says, "I'm the boss and this is how it is," and I've got a piece of paper that's got $1 million number on it, well, how'd you get there? Let's scratch at that a little bit and see, like, does you could have just hit it by chance, or your math could be wrong, or you've got an outrageous assumption to just kind of make it fit. So yeah, understanding how things fit together. I've had some cases where I've called the other experts analysis a black box, because you see some stuff on the beginning, you see some stuff pop out at the end, but you don't know what happened in the middle. So
Well, it's interesting to me because it goes back to a lot of people don't really get how to think. And why I say that is because at a higher academic level, there is, an exercise that was constantly doing, which was critical analysis and synthesis.
mhm.
And which really was something that doing it over and over and over and over really helped me to be better at what I do. And what's interesting, what you're speaking of, what goes through my mind, because we always hear, especially in business, this one word today of my boss is a narcissist.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So,
I do a lot of divorce work. I hear that word a lot. So,
or in family law.
mhm.
My ex is a narcissist, and it goes both ways, male or female. And what's really interesting to me about what we're speaking of is because I can only imagine in a family law space about how things are hidden or, altered slightly.
Oh, for all the time, all
Yeah,
the time. Not
yeah,
every time, but yeah, it's. I would say I won't percentages on it, but when you look to see like people's income, if you're let's say the recipient or the needs side, people tend to overstate their need. If you're
yep.
on the paying side of support, people will say, "Oh no, so business is down. Like I don't have any money. That was so last year. Like I'm gonna have to lay people off." So yeah, you kind of have to wade through that and be like, well, if you just look at 1 year, maybe so. Pandemic, cool, but here's where now we've got 2 data points. Call it post pandemic, 21 and 22. Now we're starting to see like are people rebounding. So those 22 numbers are pretty important in my line of work, but all the more reason why you need to get a longer time horizon just to see like what makes this business tick, or what's really, I call it popping the hood. What's under the hood of this thing? So,
Yeah, it's just intriguing to me because why I say my statement about many people fail to understand about thinking, because because most people don't think in, okay, let me put this puzzle together.
mhm.
And that's a very, very strategic move about how one would put something together. But if you're honest, you have nothing to hide. And I know there's honest mistakes of just not knowing how something worked. I get that. But I'm
Mhm.
speaking about people who deliberately do something to say, I'm just going to shortchange you.
Oh yeah, I've seen people go to jail because they won't give up documents.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's that heuristics of like dealing with imperfect information, or like limited time, limited money, like all that stuff is just it's so that's just a part of my job. I deal with that like every day. And so yeah, if I had more time and more money, and I could actually like hang out at the business and go through the boxes of their records, yeah, we would have some different numbers. But a lot of times too, it's like I don't know how this business could be still around after, losing this kind of money for so long. And especially if they've been around for 20 years, why shouldn't they be making what the industry is making? And I end up doing that sort of adjustment often, not often, but when appropriate. It's like, if you're not making that now, you should be eventually, right? So here's what everybody else makes, and I'll estimate the value using that mapped onto your revenue. And if it's not it, then show me why I'm wrong. Cough it up, and then we'll see. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's just intriguing because I know most people, if they're in hot water, they want to get out of the hot water.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody is in that type of thinking, that they've gotten themselves in the hot water because they deliberately did things of thinking they're going to get ahead by, say, short-changing their employees, or you're laughing because I know that's something that people do.
Just hit the paper. One of my valuations, this business owner was recently in the paper for just that same thing. So yeah.
Yeah. So I figured some of your work is, people do stuff like that where they're more greedy and they think they can hide. And with the advancements of technology today, that's what's intriguing to me is, you may get away with it for a while, but then all of a sudden, if the pattern is that you do this year after year after year, and let's say hypothetically that you shortchanged your employees by, I don't know, 20% per year.
Oh, yeah.
That's big numbers.
Oh yeah. I have another case where there is some class action suits against the employer, and that could put the employer out of business. So it is kind of a double-edged sword. Like, maybe they've got a good insurance policy, sure, but then now you got to go find another job.
Yeah. So are you still doing work in Alaska, or are you just strictly in the Boston area?
Kind of both. Yeah, I'd say less. Just, I still have contacts, but I've been gone now for 12 years. So while we do have our house in Kodiak, where we come up every summer, but yeah, so I'm still around, but less so.
So I love this conversation, and I can talk to you all day, Jason, because this is.
Oh, I can tell. We can just keep going, man. So.
We can go on and on and on. But anyways, if folks wanted to get in touch with you, what would be the best way?
Yeah, so I didn't think I said where I work. So like JS Health, I'm certainly there. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So I'd say if you know some folks in Alaska, like, I'm probably connected to them.
Yeah.
Just because I've been around a while. But yeah, part of it is like the people that have the mindset like, oh, nobody here or nobody in Alaska understands this, we're going to go outside or go to Seattle. Well, what's the difference between going to Seattle versus Boston and getting somebody here that knows where tutor is, like that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, obviously, like, I'd love to do some site visits in the summertime, but usually when we come up, everybody's gone anyway. So it's like, all right, well, but yeah, so no, I guess LinkedIn or jsheld.com, and that's just the letters JS and then HELD.com, and you can find me on that. So.
Cool. So any final thoughts that you want to leave viewers?
Yeah, no, I think we've covered a lot of ground, but I think it's, after listening to some of your other guests, if the theme of this is like, kind of like lessons learned, I'd say if we take information from what other people have to say, even if it's not relevant, today, some of that stuff is like, okay, well, if you hear it enough times, kind of like the spaghetti against the wall, eventually, if you get some stuff that starts to stick, and a big part of that is just action. You could have the best ideas. I've had people with crazy good ideas or geniuses, but they won't do anything, or so the people that will take, even in the venture capital kind of world, the investors will bet heavily on A people with a B idea than B people with an A idea. So yeah, if you got good folks, like good people that know how to execute on their dreams, like that's what gets the attention. Even if it is kind of that fire ready aim sort of mentality, like, yeah, you have to do something. You're going to fail, but use that and then drive on and then figure out. Like when I started teaching, like I taught the accounting 201, I taught like financial statement analysis, I taught auditing, and I was like, man, auditing is a tough class to teach. And I know this isn't for me in the long term, but it got me the next step, which is to teach business valuation, and so on. So sometimes it's like, yeah, you have to take that sous chef kind of job and clean all the toilets and all that stuff, because then you know how the business works, and then you could go on and be the boss. But if you just like, no, I don't need to know any of that, I'm just gonna skip it and go right to the top. Well, you might go right to the top and go right back to the bottom because you could run out of cash and not know it. So.
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for your expertise, and we'll talk more again. Thank you so much, Jason. And I'm going to end the broadcast, and I'll meet you offline for a second. Thank you so much.
For sure.